I bought a 1979 Toyota Corolla. It doesn't run, and we need to fix that. Let's get into it. So I bought this thing about 7 months ago. I bought it pretty much sight unseen. I parked it right here, haven't touched it, haven't looked at it, and I have finally carved out a little bit of time to start working on my project. It's going to be a budget build because I'm still a broke boy and all of my builds are budget builds. Everything I've got has got to be budget because if it's not, I won't be able to do it. I can't afford a $100,000 car, so I got to make a fun car with $10,000. Hopefully I have $10,000. First thing first is we're gonna have to start diving into this thing. I was told the engine's bad. I got it with no hood on it. This hood is just sitting here. So we're gonna dive in, see what's really going on with the engine, what's really going on with the car, and then probably what's inevitably gonna happen is this engine's gonna come out and we're gonna put something a lot more fun in its place. I'm gonna get this thing up into my garage. It's quite a bit higher than this, so we're gonna get this thing turned around, pushed up my driveway. There we go, now we're straight, and then pull the e-brake. And with some help and a lot of effort, we got the Corolla in the garage, and it's looking pretty good in some interior lighting. It needs cleaned up bad. It's got a bunch of sap and dust and just stuff from being outside for the better half of a year. And we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna pop the hood off of this thing because it is not bolted on, it's just sitting there. We're gonna assess what's going on with this engine. There is no carburetor, there's no spark plugs in it, and there's no exhaust manifold on it. And yeah, it's just really torn apart, and it's been sitting like this. I got it like this, and I left it like this for 7 months. So that is partially on me, but it is what it is. I had other things going on. We finally got time for this thing. Here is my plan for the Corolla. So here we've got a 2RZ block out of a Tacoma, fresh from the machine shop. I had the head surfaced perfect. I had all of the cylinders power honed on their machine. This is a Paradise Racing intake for an 8-port head that has a Ford 90mm throttle body, and this thing is absolutely insane. This is good to, like, I think these have been in the 6s in the quarter mile, which is way more than what I'm asking for, way more than I expect out of this Corolla. And this is a W58 out of a Toyota Supra. It's gonna bolt directly to this engine. This was actually in a 3RZ swapped MK2 Supra. I know it's gonna bolt right up, and it'll hold roughly 400 horsepower, which is about what this block will hold untouched. I'm gonna be doing stock rotating assembly, stock head, MLS gasket, and head studs. And this is gonna be the combo. We're gonna see what we can do. I've got a full standalone engine management system. I'm gonna do a full chassis wiring harness on this thing. This thing's got some blemishes in the paint and it's not perfect, but it is so good looking. I pulled the hood off and you can see what we got going on. Like I said, there are no spark plugs in any of these holes, and this is how I got it. I don't know how long it's been sitting. No exhaust manifold. No exhaust manifold at all. If any of those valves are open, that piston and that whole cylinder is open to water. No intake. There is an intake manifold, but there is no carburetor, nothing sealing it. Again, this is how I got it. The cap is off of the distributor. The rotor is off of the distributor. There's a lot of things that are missing to make this thing run. So I pulled the valve cover off, and this engine actually looks pretty clean inside, and it spins over. But that brings me to the very, very thought process question of, do I want to put the time and energy into this engine to try and get it running? I know this chassis has already been painted. This chassis came with an automatic, and it has got a 5-speed manual in it. It's not original. It's already torn apart, and I have plans to put that engine in this no matter what eventually. So I think what I'm gonna do, pull this engine out, save it for somebody else or maybe another project, and start seeing about how much room I have to put the engine I really want to put in there. That's what's going to have to happen in order for me to really enjoy driving this. So that's what I'm going to do. Look at that. In no time, it seems like we got the intake off, we got the AC off, we got a bunch of stuff cleared up over here. I got the motor mounts unbolted. All I've got left is to undo the bell housing bolts, get a jack under the transmission, and bust out my engine hoist to get this thing out of here. I put the Corolla in the air to get the last couple bolts of the undercarriage, and I noticed a couple concerning things. First thing I noticed is that there is no drain or fill plugs on the transmission. And then I got under the front of it and I got to looking, and there's no drain plug on the engine either. So I don't know what this dude had going on, but I was not aware that the engine and transmission were both completely empty, which is pretty sad because I tow dollied this thing home with the drive shaft attached. So the transmission was spinning, which is a little unfortunate, but it is what it is. We are here now. Good thing I'm drivetrain swapping it. We're set up to pull the engine out of this thing. We've got the engine hoist set up. We've got a jack under the transmission. So we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna pop this thing out. Should be completely free. Should come out relatively easy, but I've said that before and I have fought things for hours and hours. So here's hoping. Victory. I did it. It's out. And it's a lot smaller than a 2RZ. So that's interesting. We're gonna see how this little chassis likes a bigger engine. People put 2 JZs in these things, so I'm not too worried. 6 cylinders. I'm only working with 4. We've got the Corolla stripped down. The engine and transmission are both pulled out of it. There's still a ton of wiring and vacuum canisters and this, that, and the other in the engine bay. But for the most part, it's looking really empty, really good, and I'm super excited. I've got the 2T engine here, mocked up next to the RZ engine. I took a measurement. They're within 1 inch of the same length. The RZ is just a little bit longer. And this is the really exciting part. The transmissions lined up at the front, line up at the back, meaning there's a very, very good chance that this transmission is not only going to fit in that tunnel, but it's going to fit with the factory drive shaft. God, I love Toyotas. We got a ton done yesterday, and I am super stoked on the progress. The engine bay is empty. There's no transmission in it. We still have all of this wiring and every other thing in here to remove. Everything that's not brakes or steering, I'm pulling out. Gonna get this looking as clean and empty as possible. Then I can pull out the mock-up block I've got in the corner with no head and no oil pan. That will be great for mocking up an oil pan on this thing, and also making sure that we have got proper clearance for motor mounts and engine and everything is placed in the right position. Get a transmission in there. They're the same length, so I'm really hoping I can use the factory drive shaft and put the transmission in the factory location. I'm going to need to manufacture a transmission cross member because the cross member won't work, but that's okay. We'll get this figured out in no time, and I'm sure in no time flat we will have an engine in the bay and something figured out is how we're gonna bolt it in. I got the rest of everything pulled out of the engine bay. You can tell it's a lot cleaner. Got the exhaust, just all the random stuff. I didn't pull all the wiring out yet just because I didn't want to tear into the interior, but it's all out of the way. I went ahead, cleaned under it, got it back up on jack stands, and I'm assessing the drivetrains. So there's the old engine. This is the old transmission, and this is the new transmission. This old transmission, as you can tell, it's small. It is not near the girth of this W series transmission. It's also a split case, so the cases come apart sideways instead of being a tunnel case, which is a little bit stronger. But the thing I noticed, they're the same length, and I was like, man, that'd be awesome if I could use the drive shaft. But this output flange is bigger than my thumb, and this one's smaller than my thumb. To put it simply, the drive shaft's not gonna work. So I'm actually gonna go pull the drive shaft from the donor car that I pulled this out of, the Supra, and see if I can possibly either swap U-joints and make just the input onto the drive shaft of this, or I might end up needing to have a drive shaft made, which wouldn't be the end of the world. I kind of expected it, but I was hoping I could get away without it just because, you know, simplicity. But first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna jump under there, I'm gonna pull the old drive shaft out so it's out of the way, and we're gonna start mocking up this transmission. I don't think this transmission cross member is gonna work, and I don't think this transmission mount is gonna work because this mount is different than that. This cross member is different than the cross member I pulled off of this. So I'm probably gonna have to fabricate something completely new, but that should be okay, not too hard. I just did this not too long ago on the Hilux, and I'm not too scared to do it again. All right, so we're about ready to start mocking parts up on the Corolla. I am beyond excited. I've had this thing for so long and it's kind of just turned into like a dream to actually work on it. But we're here, we're doing it. We've got the old drive shaft out. We've got both the transmissions next to each other with the mounts just to see where everything lines up. And it looks like we might possibly be able to make those front holes on the mount that came out of the Supra work, possibly, who knows? If we need to make them out, we need to make them out. It's not the end of the world. But I'm gonna take the shifter off this, get it prepped to go under there, leave that mount on it for now. We can always take it off in just a second, it won't take too long. Then I'm gonna bolt it up to my mock-up block. Get the fitment in here, see if we can get it as far back as possible, see if we can get it as low as possible, how the oil pan's gonna work. We gotta make sure we can get an oil pan on this thing. I don't wanna modify that too much. If we have to, we have to. It won't be the end of the world. But I do like that this thing is just kind of stock right now, and I would prefer not to cut up the chassis too much to accomplish this. If I do, I do. It's not the end of the world, but that's my goal. We got the transmission in where it's approximately going to be. Right now it's on a jack stand and a jack, so obviously it's not mounted in any way, shape, or form. But that's about where I think it's going to be as far as forward, backward. I think it's going to come up a little bit, but I'm not exactly sure. Like I said, I want to make this engine as low as possible. So as long as I can get an oil pan to slope down into the main sump in the front, which is awesome that the sump's in the front because that's where the sump is factory on the RZ engines, I can make it work. But it's about time I get the engine hoist and hook it up to my block that I can then drop in here, and we can start seeing about where everything's gonna be, start mocking up, maybe get some motor mounts and some transmission mounts mocked up today. Maybe not finished welded out, but even if we got it mocked up, sitting under its own weight, just tacked, that would be an awesome achievement. We have a 3RZ swapped Corolla, kind of, sort of, ish. There's a 3RZ in the bay tied to a transmission. It's all centered up. It looks pretty good. I think we're gonna have plenty of room for the cylinder head and the engine to shut. I'm probably gonna start with the engine mounts, move to the transmission mounts, make everything happy, this engine centered, transmission centered, have everything tacked together, and then I can start getting finalized mounts made. Once the engine and transmission are mounted, doing an oil pan and stuff is going to be a lot easier because I'll know exactly where the cross member needs to be and where everything needs to be cut around, stuff like that. So I better quit talking. I'm going to get to work. We're going to get some motor mounts mocked up and some transmission mounts mocked up. Got a couple beginnings of motor mounts done. We've got the plate for both sides done, holes drilled, ready to go. So I'm gonna now take these motor plates and I'm gonna drop them on into the engine that's in the bay. We're gonna see how we can get it adapted over to here, what kind of motor mount we're gonna use. I was thinking about using a factory motor mount. I just have to get that lip down here to go away, which I can do with a grinder or a hammer even. He busted the welder out because I've got to get these motor mounts made. I got the plates made on both sides. I've got the motor mount in here. I need to get a plate cut out that fits this factory motor mount that'll bolt to it. And then I'm gonna get some plates cut at the proper angles. We're gonna get some crazy motor mounts going that give us clearance so we can take all the bolts out of the engine, but also take everything off of the motor mount and pull it out when needed. It shouldn't be too terrible. And in the meantime, this engine's swinging a lot less, as in none, because I went ahead and I tacked something in over here, keeping the crankshaft perfectly centered. The jack stand in the back has the output shaft perfectly centered, and the engine is just about as far back as I think is possible. That way I can still, access the bell housing bolts, be able to pull the engine, but we're also not so far forward that it's gonna be impossible to get cooling and a fan on this thing, because it's already looking like it's gonna be pretty darn tight in here after we get a radiator in. Not sure how much clearance we're gonna have for a fan. And here we have my motor mounts. Some 3/16 plate that I'm gonna be cutting up. All right, and we got some things tacked up. So I've got these two pieces of 3/16 tacked to a piece of 3/16 plate for the motor mount itself, all going to a piece of quarter that's gonna spread the load onto the block. This should be super stout. 3/16 is gonna hold the load this way. I'm gonna be plating over top of it with 1/8 inch after I weld everything up. I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna reinforce this, and we're gonna get this side completely done. Then I can move on to the driver's side. We got some things welded out. I got this entire mount. I went ahead and I just finished it out. I put the 1/8 inch plate over everything. It's got 3/16 on the side, 1/8 inch tying everything together. It's fully welded out. I'm gonna go ahead, we're gonna throw this on the engine as soon as it's cool. That'll hold this side in place. And then on the other side, I can take away this stupid stuff that's just tacked here, get this cleaned up, and get a plate cut for over here. Do everything I did on the other side, but over here, except it should be easier because this mount is tilted up with the rotation of the engine being at like a 10-degree tilt. It throws this side up, the other side down, makes this side a ton easier to build. Plus, I don't have to work around the oil filter or anything like that. Try to make sure I can get all of the bolts out of everything. Look at this. We've got a 3RZ bolted in with some motor mounts to the Corolla chassis. This is a huge step. The transmission's still on a jack stand, and that's okay. This is where the engine's gonna live. These are the motor mounts. The transmission's at the height I like. Everything is nice, it's level, it's secure, it's centered, and I am beyond excited to move on to doing a transmission cross member and getting some more things wrapped up. But it's getting a little bit late. I've got some things to do in the house, so I'm gonna clean up and I will see you tomorrow. It's the next day. Today is day 3 of the Toyota Corolla build. And today we've got engine mounts made, we've got the drivetrain mocked up in there, we gotta get transmission mounts made. We're gonna get a transmission mount made for this transmission that came out of a 1982 Celica Supra. It's gonna get mounted to the factory location under the chassis that's been reinforced for a transmission mount. We're gonna make something nice, solid, simple, and secure that we can then get all of the drivetrain mounted, and we can start working on things like the oil pan and intake and exhaust that are gonna need to be done for this thing. I got the Corolla up in the air. We've got it as high on the jack stands as I could get it, so I have more room to work under here. And I went ahead and put an adjustable jack under it so I could adjust the height wherever I needed. It's a screw jack, so it goes up and down as little or as much as I want. Got it at the right height. I went ahead and I made sure it was centered again. I measured left to right, made sure the output shaft was perfectly centered. And now I'm gonna pull this factory cross member off of the transmission, build a box around the factory mount like I did in my last 5-speed swap, and then start figuring out how I'm going to bring the mounts from the chassis back to meet the mounts on the transmission. So it shouldn't be too hard. It's just gonna be a little bit of fabrication,
and there's nothing to it but to do it, so I'm gonna get going.
We've got a solution, I think, figured out for what I'm going to do for this transmission crossmember that's going to be super duper strong and also very simplistic. These are the factory holes on both sides for the transmission crossmember that were reinforced. And I came back with some angle. Right now it's cut long on the backside because I'm not too worried about it. I'm going to be cutting it again. Then here we have a plate 3/16 cut for the base of the transmission crossmember mount. I'm going to be doing this. This is going to get bolted up into place. After it's bolted into place, I'm going to cut these plates up and in there, and they're going to be the front and back plates for the box that I'm building for this crossmember. This is what we've got going on. I've got a plate that fits in here that's going to go to the top of everything, and then the bottom of it's going to weld directly to the transmission crossmember. This is super awesome. For the first time, the engine is hung and the transmission is hung under its own weight with cross members. Everything looks nice and good. From up here, that transmission crossmember does not hang any lower than the transmission itself, which is good. I don't want to have any low spots. Everything's looking good. The transmission crossmember, I think it looks fairly sleek. It doesn't look terrible from any angle. I'm gonna cut a bunch of this excess off, make sure all of the things look decent. Right now it looks excessive and bulky, but that's just because I wanted to make sure everything had enough extra that I could cut it down later. You can always cut down. It's really hard to add. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to pull this out, make it look good, get it all boxed in. I finished up the transmission crossmember. It looks pretty good. This is what it's going to look like from below. It's got the nice plates on there to keep everything triangulated, keep everything tied together. This is all 3/16 tied to 1/4 inch angle. It's going to get bolted to the chassis. It's super stout, super strong. I'm not worried about it going anywhere. So now that it's completely welded out, everything is good to go. I'm going to throw it back under the chassis. We're going to bolt this transmission up and we're going to let it hang under full weight. I rolled the Corolla out of the garage. It's under its own weight, and I mocked a few things up. This thing looks so good. I've got the head, a valve cover, an intake and exhaust just mocked up on it, and the clearances could not be any tighter or any better. I'm probably gonna have to modify some clearances here because we're 1/8 inch from touching on the brake master cylinder. And behind the head, we've got maybe 1/4 inch between the head sensors and the firewall. But 1/4 inch is enough. It looks awesome. I'm so excited. And I think it's now time to pull all of this out, pull the engine out, and start making an oil pan. So the oil pan is gonna be a little bit of a challenge. Tight clearances in there, but it shouldn't be terrible. And I have done it before. Plus, it's already a front sump, which means it's going to be super easy. I don't have to try and fish the pickup tube all the way to the back of the oil pan. It's just going to go straight down into the sump in the front of the engine. I've got the oil pan just about mocked up to where I like the height of it. It's cut just enough to where I've got clearance on the cross member. I do want to add a little bit of capacity to either side of it
and then a couple baffles in there. But the height is what I'm really worried about. Now that I've got the height cut right and I've got the clearance for the crossmember cut right, I'm gonna go ahead, I'm going to pull this engine out. We're gonna throw it on a stand, put it upside down, and we'll be able to make the oil pan, get the pickup tube mocked up, and get everything we need to do.
All right, it's another day working on the Corolla. I actually have the Corolla rolled out of the garage just to give me a little bit extra space, because right now, all we need is this oil pan. We know these clearances are gonna work out, so I just need to get all of this kind of assembled, pretty much. So I'm not sure where I left off exactly, because it has been about 2 days since I last worked on this thing, but I've got this bent up that fits around the factory pan size. I'm gonna be welding that in place. I'm gonna be bringing it 1.5 inches forward, as well as the 1.5 inches in all directions. That's gonna give me 1.5 inches extra capacity all the way around, which, doing the math, is almost an entire quart of extra capacity, which is good, because I'm sure I cut at least a quart off of the bottom of this.
All right, we finally got the oil pan finished. It's right now wet because I just had it full of water. I did a leak test, and the only place that anything was coming out is it was dripping around this drain plug and had a little bit of a drip there. But there's no crush washer on it right now. There's no anything sealing the drain plug. It's just a metal on metal. So right now, I'm gonna prep this thing. I'm gonna get the inside cleaned out. I'm gonna get the outside cleaned up. I'm gonna get it all completely prepped, get a coat of paint on it, and then we can put this oil pan on one of these two good engines, get that thrown in the Corolla, and we can start actually mocking things up to get a running engine in the Corolla. Oh, I'm excited. I really can't wait to get this Corolla running and driving. This is gonna be such a rad project. We got the oil pan getting painted outside. I pushed the Corolla in, and I'm gonna throw the mock-up engine in there again. And that is because I want to get the cylinder head on it, and there were a bunch of tight clearances with the intake and cylinder head. We're gonna start clearancing some things and figuring out what we need to do to make sure this thing has plenty of clearance, so when I put the good engine in it, we're not fighting things. So let's tear into it. I'm gonna pull the hood off, and we're gonna get started. We went ahead, we threw everything in. We've got the trans in, we've got the engine in. I went ahead and I just barely bolted on the head, and then I bolted the intake to the head. And the reason I did that is because we're touching here. This is not clearanced enough. So what I'm gonna be doing is I'm going to actually be unbolting the head, and I'm gonna grind down this intake some. I'm gonna grind down this master cylinder just a little bit. And there's only one runner that's contacting, and I think if I clearance that and clearance this, that should get us pretty close. We do need a little bit extra clearance because the engine is going to move. It's on rubber mounts. But right now, we've only got one that's touching, and the other ones are pretty far away. So I'm gonna pull it off, try and grind that down. I know these are pretty thick, and hopefully I can get proper clearance and get that taken care of. We got the intake clearanced. I clearanced the two center runners as well as a little bit of the master cylinder. Everything there works out really well. I also double checked to make sure that the coolant temperature sensor on the back of the head is capable of being plugged in, and it is. There's just barely enough room back there. It's a little bit tight, but we can make it work. So that tells me that it's about time I can pull this engine out, get a coat of paint on the motor mounts that are on there, get another coat of paint on the oil pan, make sure the oil pan's ready to go, the motor mount's ready to go, and I can start pulling one of these good engines from in my engine corner and start throwing it in the car. That's kind of actually really, really exciting. It's gonna be awesome. I'm gonna have an engine that's like ready to fire up in the bay pretty soon with an oil pan and everything. Whew. Then I can start working on drive shaft, because if this thing fires up, oh, clutch and drive shaft, clutch and drive shaft. But for now, I gotta get a motor in this thing, so I'm gonna quit talking and get back to work.
All right, I've got the oil pan all RTV'd up. I've got the engine that's going in it with the new pickup tube. Everything is clean. I went ahead and brake cleaned everything off. So we're gonna put this oil pan on. It should be kind of interesting. I know it's gonna be kind of a pain in these corners, but once the oil pan's on, we can drop this thing in the bay. And oh boy, this is getting some genuine excitement out of me. So I'm gonna get this on, we're gonna drop it in the bay, and then we can start doing things to get this thing to fire up, like fuel. After fighting an incredibly hard battle, I had to pull the transmission out, I had to pull the sway bar mounts off, and still it barely shoehorned in there. This sway bar, I didn't realize is gonna hit that corner when you go in and out. And then also I had to trim just a little bit next to that motor mount so that it was clearancing the pan when I go in and out next time. So hopefully next time it's a little bit easier, but for now I got the engine shoehorned in there. And I can go ahead, I'm gonna restab the transmission that I had to drop. Then the engine trans should be in, and it'll be a good engine and good transmission. That's a huge step in the right direction. And I can start working on fuel. I need to get fuel from the tank to the engine. I realized before I jump onto the fuel system, what I'm actually gonna do is I was under the car and remembered that I need to get this drive shaft mocked up. So the output shaft of the transmission I put into it is not near the size of the output shaft transmission that came out of it, but these U-joints are the same size. So I was gonna go ahead, I was actually just gonna knock off this end ear on both drive shafts and throw the one from the W series onto this drive shaft, and hopefully that should make everything work out wonderful. I don't see why it wouldn't work. This is the right length actually, it's just not the right input. So we're gonna swap these over, get this drive shaft installed, and then the rear wheels in theory should be tied to a good 3RZ engine that's getting close to firing up. It's the next day, we cleaned up the giant mess we made, and we got the drive shaft in last night. So last night we went ahead, we got this ear changed out for the one that goes to this W series transmission. This is the factory Corolla drive shaft, and it all works out and fits. It's kind of crazy to me that everything just worked out. The drive shaft fits, we got it in, drive shaft hooked to transmission, through clutch, to engine. This thing is like a full drivetrain now. Everything is together, it's swapped. So now we've got a few more things to wrap up to get this engine running. We got a fuel system and we got wiring. I'm gonna start tackling the fuel system first. I wanna get fuel to this factory fuel filter on the side of the RZ engine. This one's bad. There was some bad fuel that got run through this thing, so these injectors are all stuck. Not all stuck, but there's some sticky injectors that were just pumping fuel out. And then we've got this fuel filter that is probably full of gunk. So I'm gonna replace the fuel filter and get the actual factory hard line adapted over to the feed of this factory filter on the RZ. Under the car, we've got over here some soft line that's coming straight out of the tank. And we got soft line to hard line. So I'm gonna cut this out and put an inline fuel pump, just probably a Bosch 044. I've got one lying around. And we'll have a fuel system. All right, we went ahead, we started taking the fuel lines off, and then when it started siphoning the fuel, I just let it siphon. We got 3 gallons, 4 gallons out of there, I don't know. And after that, I went ahead, got a rubber isolated mount, mounted this external fuel pump. It's not wired or anything yet, but it's mounted. It's got all the lines in place. All the lines are tight. And up in the engine bay, while all the fuel was siphoning out of the tank, I jumped up here and replaced the fuel rail with injectors and everything with the filter included, because all of that was gummed up. There was some diesel fuel that was run through the fuel system of the vehicle this came out of. Gummed some things up, but these injectors all came out of the turbo truck before I upgraded the injectors in that, and they should be great. We need to get wiring. So we've got engine mounted, trans mounted, we've got a clutch mounted. There's no starter. We need to get a starter. We need to get all of the wiring for the charge and start system, a battery, and then we can lay the engine harness in here and figure out how we're gonna get all of those wires into the car. All right, well, I've been wiring away. I put a battery in this thing. I got the starter alternator harness in here. I got power to everything. I got everything grounded. I've got the engine harness on. I've got it through the firewall. I've been cranking away. I also went ahead and started wiring up to the factory ignition. And it's not permanent, but and I'm not sure if you could hear that whining, but I even went ahead and got the fuel pump wired up. So I don't have fuel. I drained everything out of the tank. I'm gonna go run and grab fuel. I'm gonna see if this thing will fire up. It has been weeks coming. We finally got oil in it. We finally got fuel in it. And we're about to see if it starts. I primed the fuel system. Haven't seen any leaks yet. Let's see. My Corolla runs! God, it's been a long time since I've had a header dump on anything. Look at that! We got a running Corolla! I'm so stoked! Oh, we are so far from a fuel leak. We're far from a driving Corolla. Well, actually, no, we're not. The transmission and drive shaft are in it. I'm gonna go figure out what that fuel leak is, but look at that! We got a running Corolla. Engine swapped Corolla. Last night we got the Corolla running. We got the engine fired up in the bay, and since there's a clutch and a transmission and a drive shaft, it should move under its own power. I'm gonna see if it'll do that. So I got it set on the ground. It's looking awesome. I'm super stoked with how it's coming out, and we're gonna jump in it, fire it up, see if it'll move under its own power. Maybe see if the back tires will spin just a little bit. That'd be pretty cool. I'm already super motivated on this thing, so it can only go uphill from here. And my seat's the floor, so it's also a slight cause for concern. See if all that work paid off. I probably put more than enough heat into this engine. I'm sorry for your eardrums, everybody. I's excited. It did burnouts, and there's 2 tire marks. And holy crap, I forgot how loud a header dump was. Yeah. That was awesome. I'm super pumped. I'm super excited. I've got a ton more to do on that thing, but that was super, I'm literally shaking with excitement.